What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic DFS channel. And today we're talking some college football DFS ahead of the Week 3 Friday slate. 3 games. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Caesars Sportsbook. New users, you can bet $50 and you will get $250 in the form of free bets. You'll get 50 immediately when that first wager settles. Then you'll get another 4 $50 free bets for the next 4 subsequent weeks. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Without further ado, let's get into this. Bring you behind the scenes for our day-to-day usage tool. You can find this over on Stochastic. We have a college football package. You'll have access to this, projections, ownership projections, analysis, everything you'd want for college football. And to dive into it a little bit, what you're seeing on the screen here, we have basically environment factors at the top, pass rates, pace, seconds per play, Vegas data, how these defenses are allowing production. So Virginia's allowing 6.8 yards per pass. And then against the run, it's at 5.4 yards per carry. You have all the individual players below their opportunity metrics and how their routes break down, how their targets and carries, all of that. If you have specific questions, reach out to me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may or may not have on these. But let's dive in. First game, it is Virginia taking on Maryland. 14-point spread in favor of the Terps. 48.5 total, so pretty modest here. Little surprising to me. I bet the over in this game. I don't think Virginia is going to be particularly fast, but Maryland 60th in seconds per play. They were higher than that last year, so I think they probably do bring up the pace here. And they're a very pass-heavy team, so that doesn't surprise me. On the Virginia side, they are starting Tony Muskett again. Head coach came right out and said, Des Kitchens, that is, starters don't lose their job to injury. Well, Des, do they lose their job for being awful and getting outperformed by true freshman Anthony Colandrea? No answer to that, but that about sums it up for Virginia. They're starting the worst quarterback, small sample, so perhaps Muskett is better than Colandrea. But ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised to see both in this game. Muskett's terrible. He doesn't run, and he can't pass either. So it's going to be tough for him. What I will say is Maryland doesn't exactly have a formidable pass defense. They're already allowing 9.5 yards per attempt, and they lost a couple corners this offseason. So perhaps Muskett can get it done from a contrarian perspective. He would rank 5th or 6th among the quarterbacks on this slate for me. Don't love him. Don't even love him as a contrarian option. I would rather build my lineups in other ways for tournaments. The backfield's a mess. They're using 3 guys, Parrish Jones, Mike Hollins, and Kobe Pace. They're sort of getting Kobe Pace out of this rotation a little bit. He still leads this group in targets, so it's kind of difficult to decipher here. I don't want to play any Virginia backs. If I were to play one, it would be Mike Hollins at 42. He led the group in carries last week, and he's seen a few targets here as well. Among the receivers, this is a group I would isolate, especially if you're stacking Maryland, which you should be. They're an awesome team on this slate with a good team total. You can run back Virginia guys, and they immediately have 2 studs in Malachi Fields and Malik Washington. They're the top 2 receivers on this team by a wide margin, both with route shares up above 90% in the last game. But if you're getting weird and you want to play somebody pretty deep in the depths, Demick Starling is the stone minimum. He had a 71% route rate last week. Only 2 targets for him so far this year, but he's still involved with his team, and I wouldn't be surprised if you do see a better target share at some point in the future. Lastly, I mean, you could look at tight end Grant Misch, 43% route rate in the season. That was up at 55% last week. He's really the only tight end of consequence here, and he'd be the last guy I look at. Some of you may be tricked into Cedarian Harrison. He only had a 10% route rate last week. I don't really see this getting any better for him. I would focus on Demick Starling and Grant Misch for the contrarian place here, with Fields and Washington coming as the elite guys. Maryland, 31 implied team total. Taulia Tagovailoa is an awesome passer. He doesn't run a ton, but he's not taking a ton of sacks, which is positive. I don't think Virginia really turns up the heat on him either. So unlikely to get negative rushing yards. He's averaging 273 per game so far this year. It's about on par where he is with his career. Back in 2021, he was at 297 yards per game. Last year, he was at 250 yards per game through the air. So kind of right in the middle, always live for a 300-yard bonus. And then finally, it's a weak quarterback slate. So if you're playing cash or anything like that, small field, he should be the first guy in your lineup at the quarterback position. The backfield is somewhat of a committee, but Roman Hemby leads this group. Awesome matchup against Virginia's non-existent run defense. Had 19 carries in the last game. You can definitely use Roman Hemby. No issues with him whatsoever. Had 5 targets as well, so if it doesn't go according to plan, he's another guy that has elite upside in the pass game. Not really seeing any problem with playing Hemby and Tagovailoa together. You're just dealing with 6 teams on this slate, so even with negative correlation, Maryland has such an high implied team total you can get to them. Behind Hemby, Antwain Littleton and Kobe McDonald have split work. Last game, McDonald 8 carries, Littleton 4. In week 1, it was the exact opposite, so no real clear preference here. McDonald's cheaper, so he'd be the guy I would rather throw darts at with 2 guys that essentially have the same opportunity. And it makes sense. Like, McDonald's been way better than Littleton efficiency-wise on the small sample of what we've seen so far this year. In the receiving game, we did not have Tyrese Chambers last time out, which is something to monitor here. I don't know if we'll get Chambers back for this game. Virginia's a Power 5 opponent, but I would almost lean with holding him out because it's such a bad team. Anyway, Chambers operates as a top 3 receiver when healthy, so his absence would be noteworthy. The other receivers you're really looking at here are Jayshon Jones. He's the number 1. When we look at the most recent game for them, it was essentially non-competitive, so it's tough to evaluate. But I dug into their routes in the more competitive game they played this year. Jayshon Jones, 89% route rate. That's number 1 on this team. Number 2 was actually Ty Felton. He also had an 89% route rate. He's 4,900. He'd be the cheaper guy I look to in this spot if Tyrese Chambers is out. And third was Caden Prather. Caden Prather's actually tied with Jones for targets, but he's been way behind Jones in terms of routes. So Prather came in at 65% of the routes last week in their competitive game. I would rank him behind Ty Felton price adjusted, and I don't think people are going to take that approach. So right away, Jones would be the stud I get to. Felton would be the cheaper guy I go to. And then in the mid-price range, you still have Corey Dykes, their tight end. His route rate has been solid, and he's been very, very active in the pass game here. So I think you could definitely play Dykes, 68% route rate in their final game. Most recent game, I should say. And then when we get to the very deep players, Octavian Smith had a 30% route rate last week. I imagine most of that would go to Tyrese Chambers if Chambers is in fact active. So Smith would be like he would be a very distant 4th or 5th option in this past game. And there's no question I would rather play Ty Felton than Octavian Smith right now. The role is just vastly different so far to this point in the season. And I don't think we should be getting to anyone really, really deep. Contests just aren't big enough to look at like Shalik Knotts or Rico Walker, any of these really deep guys. Second game, we have Army taking on UTSA. UTSA is a 9-point favorite. Total is 45. Army taking a ton of money. The under's taking money. It's because Frank Harris is banged up. We'll dissect that in a second after we talk about Army, who's running the triple option or a version of it. Their pass rate's actually higher than it has been recently at 20%, 20.5%. Main signal caller here is Bryson Daly. Still not much passing for him, just 11 attempts per game. Has been decently efficient here, so Daly's not quite as bad as former Armed Force signal callers. He does have 29 attempts through 2 games, and they also played a non-competitive game last week. So when you go back to week 1 in a truly competitive game, he had 20 carries. Daly's live for tournaments. I would rank him for 5th or 6th probably a quarterback still on this slate. I would put him ahead of only the Virginia quarterbacks, but unlike previous slates with Armed Force quarterbacks, I think he's more live than some other guys we've seen in the past. At running back, I do like Army's backs for tournaments. It comes down mainly to price. I think the 2 most active guys in this backfield are going to be Jacoby Buchanan and Hayden Reed. That's what we saw in week 1 where they played in a slightly more competitive game. Buchanan's been there for a long time. He's a big, 250-pound back. He's more live for touchdowns, I think, than anyone else here in this team. He's the guy I'm looking at 3,500. And again, this comes down mainly to price. We don't really have any other viable options in this price range at running back specifically, so he kind of adds a little bit of leverage to your builds. I'll be sprinkling in these Army backs, especially at the cheap prices. At receiver, Isaiah Alston's their number 1. He has a 41% target share, which has only amounted to 11 targets this year. I'd rather go elsewhere, but you're getting really deep. don't exactly hate it. Otherwise, I mean, your slot backs are A1 Marshall, Miles Stewart. The one thing I'd worry about is Tyrell Robinson coming back. He hasn't played yet this year. He's questionable. Maybe you see him return. He plays the slot back position. Just a name to monitor here for Army. But they'll be contrarian. Don't hate using their cheap options, especially Buchanan and Reed. For UTSA, Frank Harris played through a toe injury last week, and a lot to be said about this. His efficiency has been really bad this year. He hasn't run as much. He is only averaging 2.6 yards per carry. This is a guy that's around 4 for his career. His passing yards have been way down, 211 per game. They've been in competitive games as well, but he's just clearly banged up. Still, 6,100 is an absurd price for him if he plays. I'll be basically using Frank Harris as the second best price-adjusted quarterback. I think the injury just makes him a little more volatile than Tagovailoa, but still going to be a top 2 option here. Eddie Lee Marburger is viable if we get the news that Harris is out. He's definitely not as mobile, but he's the stone man, and we've seen him in the past. He's a decent passer and can orchestrate the offense. I would still play him above probably any other signal caller in this slate just for the salary you're saving. The backfield, Kavorian Barnes is a top 2 option on this slate. He's right up there with Roman Hemby. No issues using him. He had 26 carries in their last game. And what we really like about Barnes is he has a 60% route share, 4 targets on the year. He's active in the pass game, so no matter what game script this goes into, he's going to be playing well ahead of Robert Henry and Rocco Griffin. Those guys are only used for deep tournaments. And the reason I don't love Robert Henry and Rocco Griffin is their price at 49 and 5,100. I would just rather take a shot on an Army back rather than play these guys with the absurd price tags for pure change of pace backs. Barnes, I'm basically locking into lineups. At receiver, we have another injury situation to monitor here with DeCorian Clark. DeCorian Clark warmed up for their last game, suited up, didn't end up playing. I believe he's 4,300. I don't have him listed on the screen because he hasn't actually recorded a stat yet. But last year, this guy was over 700 receiving yards, very clearly a top 2 option on this team. I would narrowly rank him behind Joshua Cephas. But if we'd seen DeCorian Clark played all this year, I would guess DraftKings probably would have priced him at like $6K. So you're getting a severe discount here on DeCorian Clark. Make sure he warms up. I think he's more likely to play this week than last week. Clearly approaching full health. If he warms up, I wouldn't have a problem playing him. I know he warmed up last week and didn't play, but I'm willing to take that shot for potential leverage here. Otherwise, Cephas is the clear wide receiver 1. DeCorian Clark's potential return would thrust Tyke Ogle-Kellogg back to the wide receiver 3 role. Chris Carpenter probably doesn't see the field much if that happens. Otherwise, let's say for a second Clark is out. Cephas is the clear 1. Ogle-Kellogg's the clear 2. And then they run a rotation at wide receiver 3. Otherwise, Oscar Cardenas is the tight end. He has about a 60% route rate this year. He's been uninvolved. I don't love his price. I would rather play like a Demick Starling at 3K flat, an Army running back, taking shots there over Cardenas, the tight end. But you could definitely take a look here, I suppose. Only other guy to mention, Houston Thomas. Throw a dart if DeCorian Clark is out. Don't hate that. Otherwise, I will not be using these ancillary pass catchers, assuming Clark returns. Going to the final game here, we have Utah State taking on Air Force, another Armed Force Academy, so this should be a fun one. Love when we get them on these short slates. The spread in the game is 9.5 in favor of Air Force, and Utah State, they come in with about a 17-point implied team total. The overall total in the game is 44 points. Utah State plays really fast, 20th in seconds per play. They pass a ton, 67% of the time. Cooper Lega has not shown a lot through first 2 games, but he is a decent sample of being mobile, over 300 yards rushing for his career. He's not going to be Frank Harris when fully healthy or something out there, but he's definitely not picking up zeros. And then this team throws just so much that he's going to backdoor his way to good games at times. I have questions with Air Force on defense. They've played Sam Houston, who cannot play at all, and Robert Morris, who's an FCS team. Their defense lost 6 of 7 in the front 7. So there's at least questions to be asked with Air Force. I don't think they're this stone lock them down defense just yet. So a contrarian Lega actually makes some sense to me. I'll be playing him in some lineups, especially the ones I'm looking to gain some leverage in tournaments. Backfield's really difficult to decipher. 3-way committee. No real differentiation between Devon Booth, Rayshawn Faison, and Robert Briggs. Prices aren't great on these guys. Rashul Faison is the cheapest and best price adjusted play in my opinion. I'll look to him the most, but I don't feel good about this unit. And then the receiving core is pretty cut and dry. Terrell Vaughns and Jalen Royals are the top two guys. Very clear route shares for these guys. It's once we get behind them that where it gets difficult here. And I would rather play Vaughn over Royals right now. Just 28 targets to 10 is Vaughn has a 40% target share. He's probably the first receiver that enters your lineup today, even with the tough matchup on deck or the perceived tough matchup. Royals is a great leverage play. He's not even 1K cheaper than Vaughn, which is a mistake in pricing. It's once you get beyond this where it's difficult to evaluate because we again have another potential injury. Otto Tia missed their last game. In the first matchup, he had a 55% route share that only trailed the top two in Micah Davis. Micah Davis ended up having a 59% route share in week 1, 42% in week 2. Right away, if Otto Tia is in, I would rank them in this order. Vaughn, Royals, Davis, Tia, Bowman. If we get Tia out, I would rank them Vaughn, Royals, Davis, Bowman. With, I guess, probably Kahanu Davis 5. Don't love that. Kyrese Rowan 5 maybe. But I would honestly probably look to a tight end in their place instead. Brock Lane came back from injury, only 30% of the routes last week. He likely sees his routes rise in the event that Otto T is out. He kind of plays like a move tight end position. So there's a lot to break down for Utah State. I actually like the prices on these guys. So to recap this pass catching core just briefly, Vaughns is very clearly the one I think he's the best receiver play on the slate. Royals, pretty good leverage off of him. 3 is Micah Davis, and then 4 is going to depend on the status of Otto Tia. Otto Tia would be 4 ahead of Kobe Bowman, but if we see the injury influence this a little bit, I would go Bowman 4 and then Kahanu Davis 5, followed by Brock Lane 6, the move tight end, who likely sees more work in the future. Last team, we've got Air Force. Zach Larrier is my preference among Armed Force Academy's quarterbacks over the Army signal caller. 19 carries last game against Sam Houston State in what was competitive, just a defensively sound game. Larrier is still behind Frank Harris and Talia Tagovailoa for me, but in the GPP category, along with the Army signal caller and Laga for Utah State. The backfield is tricky here. So we had a more competitive game against Sam Houston last week. Owen Burke outcarried Eldridge 18-5. Emmanuel Michel even had 8 carries compared to Eldridge's 5. I don't know what happened here, but I expected Eldridge to be the lead back. I think we're getting a big enough sample here where we can assume Burke has overtaken him. 18 carries in a competitive game last week. I think you can play Burke. He would rank RB3 for me right now behind Hemby and behind Kavorian Barnes. You want to get contrarian? Don't hate throwing a dart on Michel or Eldridge. Think both are completely fine here. Among the Armed Force Academies, Navy plays on Thursday and Army's on this slate. Air Force passes the least right now, so I would rather play an Army pass catcher than like a Jared Rosnos or a Caden Alexander, something like that. But GPPs, you got to be crazy. It's a 3-game slate. Don't hate it, but would rather look elsewhere for this team. All right, that'll do it for us. If you have a question, please leave a comment. You can find me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski as well. Otherwise, we'll be back breaking down the Saturday slate, so look forward to that. But until then, good luck, everybody, and we will see you next time.